Welcome once again to Cinemaholics, the major motion podcast, where we talk about the biggest and the best films coming to theaters and streaming online. And boy, do we have a big film to talk about on this week's show. First of all, from the San Francisco Bay Area, I'm John Negroni. I'm the film editor for theyoungfolks.com. And from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, he's a news and entertainment writer at Collider. It's Will Ashton, God of Wonder.
Oh, wow. That's a very flattering intro for me this time.
Yeah, I haven't been nice to you in a while, so I guess
that's true.
Yeah. We have a special guest to talk about Thor with us. Now, Brian Young is a writer, a filmmaker, journalist, storyteller, literally does so many things. I don't even know how to condense it. Let's see. Okay, does the podcast Full of Sith podcast, has been a regular contributor for StarWars.com, Star Wars Insider Magazine /film. I think, Brian, you were the founder of Big Shiny Robot, right?
Yeah. I started that website to start talking about Star Wars because at the time when I was writing for Huffington Post, they weren't that interested in it. And I was like, well, I need somewhere to do it.
There you go. And Brian, welcome to Cinemaholics for the first time. So glad to have you here. So honored to have you on the show.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. It's I'm sure, trust it'll be my pleasure more than yours.
Well, that's the thing. I've always wanted to have you on to talk about a Star Wars thing. The thing is, there hasn't been that much Star Wars content in the movie scene lately. Rise of Skywalker was the last thing, and then before that, I think we had Rogue One, Solo, a bunch of other stuff like that. But it's been a while. We've been mainly getting the Star Wars TV shows, right? So, is there anything you want to plug in that vein regarding Star Wars or anything else?
If you like how I talk about anything like this or Marvel movies, be sure to check out my Star Wars podcast, Full of Sith, and we're talking about everything Star Wars, so the books, the comics, the movies, the TV shows. So if you're really diving into Star Wars, that podcast is the right place for it. But you mentioned /film, which is where I write about film in general and cover the Star Wars beat, and novelist as well. I've got a book coming out this month, actually, in the Battletech universe, and I've got some stuff in the Big Bang Theory TV show universe coming out in September.
Wow, that's awesome. That's amazing to hear. Hope it goes super, super well. I know you've done Robotech stuff, right? The role-playing game?
Yeah, actually, the next volume of that that covers the Southern Cross is coming out this year as well, and I wrote a whole bunch of fiction for the role-playing game and all the scenarios and things like that for the first season, the Macross Saga, and this new one that's coming out this year. So all the techs, I get all the Battletech and the Robotech.
Well, there's a lot of tech in Thor: Love and Thunder, I guess. I guess it's more like god mythical stuff. Before we get rolling on that movie, we need a little bit of a palate cleanser, right? We need some context, I think. And we also need a little chance for the listeners to get to know Brian a bit. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to have a little bit of let's check in on the state of Marvel. Let's do that. Brian, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, it's been going on since Iron Man in 2008. I forget how many films we're at this point. 20-something. It's in the upper 20s, I want to say.
29, I think, right?
We're almost at 30? Oh, mazel tov. Okay. Mm-hmm. So we're almost there. And there have been so many movies. There have been so many shows. So, Brian, where do you stand on, let's say, the MCU in general? And then I also want to talk about the Phase 4, because I can get even more specific, I guess.
So I've been on board with the Marvel Cinematic Universe for a long time. It's weird having watched them grow up with my kids. Iron Man, that first one, was the first midnight showing I took my son to, and he was, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6, and now he's 20. So it's I don't know, however that age range works when Iron Man came out, but so it's been really interesting to watch it through my eyes as a comic fan. I mean, I used to own a comic book store for many years and was up to date on everything, and I'm not so much anymore. But watching it through my eyes as an old school comics fan and through his eyes as sort of a newer, like, this is my Marvel sort of fandom, it's been really interesting. There's definitely been some misfires here or there, or movies that I like less than others. But overall, I've really been enjoying it. I've been taking my 7-year-old daughter through it recently because she really wants to start watching the movies in the theaters. And we actually just finished Infinity War yesterday and started Endgame. So that's where she's at there. And so I've really been enjoying it. Going into Phase 4, I'll be honest, I think some of the stuff in Phase 4 is some of my favorite, and it's because everything feels like a comic. And I know that that doesn't work for a lot of viewers, but it seems to work pretty uniquely for me in that all of these crossovers and these ties of different bits of lore is the sort of stuff I got excited reading comics about, if that makes sense, where I could say, oh, it's that book, or, oh, of course it's Agatha Harkness, or things like that, and like, wait, this is the Darkhold, and then be able to, I don't know, I just really love talking about stuff like that, so being that sort of Marvel nerd as well from the comics, to talk to everybody around me has created a really great cinematic experience, because people will be like, wait, I missed this, or like, wait, the goats have names, and I'm just like, of course they do, they're the best.
Yeah, don't you read the credits? What you mentioned though, Phase 4, some of it's been your favorite. What is, like, leading into Thor, like when you were going in, what was your favorite Phase 4 movie or show up until that point? WandaVision really has been like a cut above. I really enjoyed Loki. Loki, I don't know. Loki was weird because they shot so much of it in Atlanta in like Dragon Con venues, so that was weird, but that was fun. Oh, so you recognized like everything.
Oh yeah, no,
That's funny.
It was weird. And then I've really enjoyed. Like, I really like Sam Raimi's take on Multiverse of Madness. I would have been really interested in Cargill and Derrickson's take on it, but I liked Raimi's version of it. And the Spider-Man movie worked really, like, Tom Holland just works really well for me. Like, I don't have any real complaints. Tom Holland's movie was just great because I got more Tobey Maguire.
Will, I know you just did like your own like ranking of all the Marvels on your letterbox. I guess we can plug that for you, right? Or do you don't want to plug that? You don't want the heat?
Yeah, I'd rather have a nice, pleasant Monday personally, but you know, okay. I mean, it's out there. I can't stop the public conversation for it.
I just don't get why Eternals is your number one. You know,
it's not my number one. But I don't know. I mean,
was it? It's like your absolute last one, isn't it?
I guess, but I don't really know. Like, that's the trouble with ranking these things, is that
you don't even seem to hate it that much or anything.
I mean, I would just rank them as far as like, if I had to choose which of these I would watch right now, which would I watch? And I was like, at the end of the day, Eternals is not one I want to revisit, but it is one I do find to be very curious. I mean, I am, for better or for worse, I do find the Phase 4 of the MCU to be sort of fascinating in how it is taking more swings. It's doing things that I would prefer it had done earlier, which is like making more filmmaker driven films, you know, certainly Doctor Strange, even though it is kind of a hodgepodge of Raimi's influence and Kevin Feige's influence, there is quite a bit of Sam Raimi's style in there. And I think that's the big reason why it's my personal favorite of the MCU, or the new phase of films. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, Eternals, I just remember being really, really bored watching it. So I don't really have any desire to revisit. And I just found it to be a pretty big mess. But there is some charm to be had in how much of a blunder I found it to be.
It's weird. Like, I remember leaving the Eternals going, I don't know why people didn't like that. I really loved that. I thought it took some swings and did really interesting things. But now, as we're talking about it, I, for the life of me, can't really remember anything about it.
I remember Demon Dogs. I know that was a thing.
Oh, man.
And that's about it. I remember, like, there was, like, that ending sequence, and I guess this is a spoiler for the post-credit scene in Eternals, so if you don't want to know about that, skip ahead. But they have the whole Harry Styles thing, and, like, the Star Fox intro, and something like that a few years ago would have had me leaping out of my seat, being like, wow, that's awesome. Like, what? That's such great casting. Oh, my God, what? And instead, I kind of felt nothing. And I felt nothing with, like, you know, we have literally Kit Harington, you know, coming in as Black Knight. And I don't know. I felt like I should have been excited. For some reason, I wasn't feeling excited. And I wanted to bring up, you know, sort of a pre-plug because it's not out yet. But at the Young Folks, our editor-in-chief, Allie Johnson, is working on a piece. It should be out later today about her kind of issues with Marvel, like in general. And she kind of references one of the positive things she references is how Eternals and Multiverse of Madness, like they seem to have like directors behind them with like a vision, like with something to really add, like a cinematography that kind of stands out a bit with Eternals. And, also referencing how it feels like some of these things are, like you both are saying, taking swings. But her thing was she felt like there's like a lack of sincerity, I guess, was her take. And she was really feeling it with Thor, Love and Thunder. Even though, I disagreed, I found her arguments kind of compelling. And so that'll be a nice little thing to share along, if listeners, if anybody's curious about that, because I think critics are kind of coming down on this Thor movie. I guess we can lean into it. And they're a bit divisive, if you go on Twitter, it really feels like people either really, it's not Love and Thunder, it's love and hate. And I find it very fascinating because I don't think it's that a movie that is, I don't really see why people hate it so much, I guess. And I know, Will, you have some theories about this.
Well, for one, you had the pun "hate and thunder" there, but you went with "love and hate," which I
love
think
and hate.
I guess. Well, because you did say it was divisive, so I guess that is fair.
Yeah, it works. You can do your own pun, and it'll be just as great.
But what was the initial question that you had?
Well, first, I just want to. Have you seen kind of this whole thing where it just seems like people really hate this thing?
Oh yeah,
and I think that's like Allie's point. I think was that a lot of it isn't really the movie. It's sort of like people are annoyed at like Marvel and Taika Waititi, and they're taking it out on this movie. And she's like, it's not even to her. She's like, it's not even that I think it's like one of the worst of these movies by any stretch, but it's just sort of like a lightning rod, not to bring another pun into it.
No, I do agree with that because I feel like this is sort of like a dam breaking moment for the DC or the MCU. I mean, I just feel like you said, like, it feels like people are kind of just getting tired of the in-house Marvel style. People are getting tired of Taika Waititi's style. I mean, certainly Jojo Rabbit was also fairly divisive.
A movie that I still contend was actually really good, and I find the hate for it kind of baffling to this day. But
I mean, people are still talking about it, which is something.
Wait, no such thing as bad don't press? Like Jojo Rabbit?
I know, right?
I don't know. I think Taika Waititi's got a really, really unique, like, singular voice in the MCU. To be honest, and maybe it's just because I've curated my feed because of in the wake of The Last Jedi, I've had to block so many like really bad faith trolls that I haven't seen any real like hate for Love and Thunder. The only thing I've seen for Love and Thunder that feels like valid criticisms have been coming from LGBTQ critics who are talking about really how it doesn't go far enough into actually validating that representation, and that it wasn't, queer enough for their tastes.
And what's funny is like I've seen those takes, and I've found them to be very nuanced. I found them to be very much like, here's where the movie works, but in these sort of respects, it kind of falls short. Like I haven't seen just like, man, this movie is like the worst of the worst or anything like that because of any lack of representation, or that it doesn't go far enough with the representation it does have. At least that's what I've seen. But we should talk about what we think of the movie. But Brian, did you have anything else you want to add to that?
Well, no, I was just going to say, like, I think there's a strand of people who are, I don't know, Twitter. It's important to remember Twitter is not the general public.
If you say so. I'm starting to wonder, though. But yeah, we should talk about what we think. Let's talk about Thor, Love and Thunder. Let's set this movie up. We already mentioned, according to Will, and I think he's right, he usually is, it's the 29th film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the MCU. This is the fourth Thor movie. So we got the first Thor, directed by Kenneth Branagh. We got Alan Taylor's follow-up sequel in 2013, Thor: The Dark World. Originally, it was supposed to be made by Patty Jenkins. Fell through because Patty Jenkins was basically trying to do something cool with it, and Marvel was a little bit like, well, we want Game of Thrones. We want something a little bit more fantasy, fantastical. We don't want this like Romeo and Juliet thing. So they kicked Patty Jenkins out, created this huge rift with Natalie Portman, who would eventually just disappear from the MCU as a result until now. And Thor: The Dark World, widely regarded as one of the weakest of the Marvel films. Although it's gotten a little bit of like a social media rehab. Some people being like, it wasn't that bad. You guys are exaggerating. But I find it to be okay. And then after that, we get the big Thor sort of refresh. It's like, let's rethink the Thor character. Age of Ultron came out and people are like, man, Thor is just what's going on with this character. That he has that whole sequence in Age of Ultron where he's just like disappears for a minute, and it's like, okay. But then we get Thor Ragnarok, which is like a watershed moment for the character. It's taken, World War Hulk and Planet Hulk and all this stuff. I guess more just Planet Hulk. And it's sort of like bringing Hulk and Thor together in a very cosmic adventure. It's resetting a lot of things. It's getting rid of the hammer. It's getting rid of Odin. It's getting rid of all these things so that we can make room for just kind of a new take on Thor. It's comedic. Taika Waititi directs. It's super successful with a lot of people. People really like it. It's not the biggest moneymaker for these Marvel movies at the time and now, but clearly it earned a lot of goodwill. People were like, we kind of like this sort of like, you take a little bit of the Guardians of the Galaxy vibe, you mix it with Taika Waititi's irreverent humor, boom, you have a new take on Thor that's really fun. We get him again in Infinity War and Endgame, and that's also kind of stretching that take on the character a little bit, but with a more somber tone here and there. And then of course all those gags. But then we get Thor Love and Thunder, which is post Endgame. It's the fourth Thor movie. I can't believe there's a fourth Thor movie. That to me makes no sense, but out of context, it doesn't make sense. But yeah, Thor Ragnarok was very successful. It's been 5 years, and here we are with Taika Waititi returning as director, co-writing the script with Jennifer Caden Robinson. We have Chris Hemsworth returning as Thor. We have a new villain, Gore the God Butcher, from a very well-regarded Thor comic book storyline we might get into. And then we also have Tessa Thompson returning. We have Natalie Portman, as I mentioned before, coming back as Jane Foster, also adapting The Mighty Thor, another well-regarded storyline. It's kind of taken Mighty Thor and Gore the God Butcher, these two very different comic, I guess more recent comic things, kind of putting them together. What do we think, though, of this movie where Thor is kind of out to stop Gore the God Butcher from trying to eliminate all the gods while also reconnecting with Jane Foster, who has mysteriously inherited Mjolnir, a repaired Mjolnir, and now has the powers of Thor. Brian, I want to start with you in terms of Thor Love and Thunder. What worked for you about this movie, what didn't work, and everything in between?
So one of the things that worked well for me, one of my favorite things in movies is villains that really reflect the hero and have very similar aims to the hero. And Gore the God Butcher is very much that Thor if you push him too much in the dark, right? It's that like Belloc and Indiana Jones kind of thing. But you don't quite realize that right off the bat, right? But there's this thread between Gore and Jane Foster with their weapons that I really, really loved how they tie it together and intertwine those stories and kind of show you different sides of these coins. And so from like a structural standpoint and a storytelling standpoint, I really, really loved it. Watching it a second time, the things that I was curious about or feeling like they didn't quite work all worked the second time. But more than anything, I was really taken aback that not only they were able to adapt that Jason Aaron sort of Mighty Thor and Gore the God Butcher story, but that they just infused it with the fun of like that classic run of Walt Simonson Thor. Whether that's Tooth Gnasher and Tooth Grinder, or just the way the stories are told and how boldly they're told. It's just really, really fun. And if I'm going to a superhero movie, I kind of want to have fun for the most part, especially Thor, who was always my favorite comic character. I don't think it made any mistakes bigger than the Dark World did, but it had a lot of action sequences much better than the Dark World. But Dark World had that multi-planar fight with Mjolnir that was so cool that I don't think it gets enough credit for. But this was, I think, on par with Ragnarok as far as I'm concerned. My biggest complaint is a spoiler, so I won't get into it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we might have to then later do like a little tiny little spoiler things. I want to hear it. But yeah, I got to say, you mentioned the weapons in this. And this was one of the first, movies I've seen in quite a while where I actually kind of was thinking to myself, man, I want to play with these toys. I want a Mjolnir and a Stormbreaker, and I want to pretend that they're like in a star-crossed lover storyline. That's kind of weird for me to admit right now. But anyway, Will Ashton. Will, I was listening, and you know this. I was re-listening to our conversation about Thor Ragnarok in 2017, our 38th episode of Cinemaholics. And for the listeners who already forgot, it's been 5 years.
I hope they
you and I had a fun conversation about that movie. I was very much like, I wasn't as high on Thor Ragnarok back then as I am now, because I remember rewatching Thor Ragnarok and being like, actually, this rules. I think I was a little bit more measured on it. Like, I really liked it, but I was a little bit like, there are a couple things, but. The more I've rewatched Thor Ragnarok, the more I've been like, you know what, this is one of my favorites. This is top 3. Like, this is just, it's so rewatchable. It's so funny. I really love the mood and energy of it. Didn't even mention Love and Thunder. Kind of takes the Led Zeppelin thing and translate it, and now we're doing Guns N' Roses, and it's great. I'm a sucker for any of that kind of motif stuff.
Sure.
But you were a little bit lower on Thor Ragnarok. You weren't super low. You weren't just like a hater or anything, but you certainly weren't as enthusiastic about it. How do you view it now? Like, it's been some time. Did you ever rewatch it?
I did. I rewatched all the previous Thor movies before this one, because it's been a long time since I've seen the first 2 Thor films. I mean, I've only seen each of them once before this. So, at the time, I remember being really high on the first Thor. I think I even said so in that review.
Yeah.
I think a part of it was just nostalgia. Like, I'm really nostalgic for that first phase of the MCU, just because it was like when I was like in high school or getting out of high school, it just felt really fresh to me. Like, we're getting these big Marvel movies on the big screen again, or like, in a big way. And, like, they had these like quirky styles to them, like each of the filmmakers, I think, incorporated something a little bit different, but there is still the promise of like, these are all going to be interconnected in this big cinematic event, which accumulated with the Avengers film, which now seems kind of quaint when we look back on where they've gone since then. But yeah, I mean, I think that first movie, the first Thor movie, certainly a fairly wonky film upon revisiting it, but I still think there is some charm to it. I think some people dismiss the whole sort of facts Shakespearean stuff that Brana brings to it, but I think that adds a sort of goofiness I feel is getting a little bit lost with the more recent Marvel movies. Like, I think Doctor Strange and Multiverse of Madness is starting to bring it back a little bit, but I feel like there's this aversion to being sort of like straight face and goofy with the Marvel lore and the set dressing and stuff like that. And I like that movie felt like not only like a film, but it felt like a little bit of the type of superhero movies that I grew up with. So I did have some, still some nostalgia for that. And I do think that even though Jane Foster isn't the most well-developed character in the first film, I do think she has Natalie Portman and Chris Hemsworth have like a pretty good amount of chemistry in that first film, and I think that carries a good bit of it as well as Tom Hiddleston's performance as Loki. I think even from that first film, it was pretty clear why he's became such a fan standout. Dark World, didn't really like it much when I saw it the first time in college. Still just don't really like it much. If anything, I like it less now. And I just think it just doesn't really work. But I think there are some shots, particularly in that first opening fight, that I think are a little bit more handsomely produced than I gave it credit. And I think, like even like the Viking funeral scene in that film looks pretty nice. And like there's like a couple little small grace notes in that I didn't really give it credit, I think, at the time. But yeah, I just don't think it really works. And with Ragnarok, I would say, to your point, I think it is the best of the Thor films. But yeah, I mean, I think my problems I had with it at the time still stand. I think the second act is really where it flourishes. That's really where you can see Taika Waititi having fun. I think Jeff Goldblum is a standout of the film, but I think Tessa Thompson as Valkyrie is just a lot of fun. I think Korg in that first film, or that third film, is fun. Yeah, I mean, I just don't really connect with like the first act at all. It just feels kind of like it's him just kind of going through the motions a bit. There's a couple fun touches in there, but particularly with Anthony Hopkins actually getting to have fun and not just giving leaden exposition as he did in the first two films. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a fun film. I don't fully get on board with people saying it's the best or one of the best Marvel movies, but I can certainly see why they feel that way about it, at least.
Well, can I say then, because you mentioned the Sakaar stuff in Thor Ragnarok, and I think that whole thing that you're talking about there, that's what I wanted from this omnipotent city stuff that we get in Thor Love and Thunder. And I think once we get to that and we get to the Zeus stuff, we get to Russell Crowe, I know I think they cut some stuff out that might have included more I think Lena Headey had maybe a few scenes. Jeff Goldblum was going to be in a few things. I don't know if it was going to be in that location. Yeah, Peter Dinklage was going to come back or something. And I think like maybe it was going to be like Gore the God Butcher doing more God the God, more butchering, for all we know. But I was hoping that Omnipotent City would be that like the new Sakaar for this movie, where we would go to this really fun location. Lots of really exciting things would happen. We really only get like 2 scenes in this location. I found it to sort of be like, it's just kind of like Asgard. Like I didn't find it visually interesting. And I think this is where the movie kind of loses steam for me. What did you think about it, Brian?
I think that's actually where it picked up for me thematically. It was a cool visual and it didn't have a lot of stuff happen in that excitement realm, but the movie has so much to say about what the duty of a god is and what the duty of a worshiper of a god is, and tries to actually ask these questions about uncaring gods that people have in today's day and age through the lens of Thor. And I think Omnipotent City was exemplary in exploring how absurd the theory of gods are. I mean, maybe I'm coming at that from my very passive-aggressive atheist perspective, but it has interesting things to say thematically that tie directly into Gore's story and ties Gore's story and his troubles to Thor's. So even though it wasn't like the most exciting thing, even though it was delightful to watch Russell Crowe, it fit so well thematically in the structure and the scheme of the story that it felt very, it earned its place in my view.
I definitely like the message. I totally agree with you there. Like, I think the whole idea of like Gore's motivation and like the villain's sort of like trajectory through this, I totally was on board for. I thought that was a really great way to step it up, since like, how do you follow Hela, who's like this extremely like unstoppable character? How do you stop something like, how do you top Ragnarok in that sense? And I like this. It was like, let's get a little creepy with it. Let's get a little edgy. Let's do a satanic panic kind of iconography to tell this story about, taking the gods down a peg. I think in that respect, this movie picks up for me, at least again, when we kind of get away from like the Russell Crowe kind of being a Greek god. I did appreciate the Greek sort of like, affectation they put on it, but when they go to that like evil like dark planet or whatever, and you have that kind of 360-degree fight happening there, that was stuff that I was wanting, and it took a while to get there for me, but like those kind of action sequences were really like, okay, this is cool. Like I like what I'm seeing. This is thrilling. It's not just funny. It's not just like emotional stuff like with what's happening with Jane, but it's also just a really good action movie in those scenes. But people have been complaining about, and I'm sorry to bring it back to the, the discourse, but people are saying the VFX here, the special effects are not that great. And you know who agrees with them? Taika Waititi and Tessa Thompson. They had that Variety thing where they're actually like literally making fun of the special effects in their movie, and people are getting upset. They're like, you're criticizing your own, people on this. They worked hard and pay them more, and there's a little bit of stuff going on there.
Well, it's more just because there's been a lot more recently coming out that, like, because they're not really unionized, that Marvel's been leaning heavily on these VFX companies to like basically do a lot of their work for them. They're giving them these extremely tight deadlines, and they're forcing them to do like 3 or 4 options because they're not really 100% sure what they want the backgrounds to be for certain shots. I know that was the case with Shang-Chi and like the climax. That's why that last few minutes kind of look a little wonky, but I don't know. It just felt kind of disrespectful to kind of piss on their work, considering that these stories are coming out. I don't think that was their intent, but it did sort of sour the mood a bit when these stories are coming out and you see the director of one of these big films just kind of be like, making fun of that,
Well, I think Taika Waititi is going to be irreverent to everything, and you're right. I don't necessarily get the vibe that his intention was to take a crap on those technicians, but I don't know. Personally, I have a hard time listening to people go, I didn't like the effects. Going back to, as a kid watching that From Star Wars to Jedi documentary, and George Lucas pretty boldly proclaiming to my 6-year-old self, a special effect is a tool, a means of telling a story. A special effect without a story is a pretty boring thing. If I'm sufficiently invested in the story, I don't care I'm cool with puppets. I love Harryhausen movies. Yeah. As long as I'm invested in the story, I can suspend a lot of disbelief for bad effects. So that never really, affects me the way I think it affects some other people. There was a lot of discourse around this about Luke in the second season of Mandalorian when he shows up to grab Grogu. And it's that was Luke was the only person who would make sense in the story, and I was riveted by that. I didn't care how glassy-eyed he might have looked. It was Luke again, you know what I mean? So some of the dodgy effects in Thor: Love and Thunder didn't really matter to me because I got Tooth Gnasher and Tooth Grinder hauling an Asgardian boat across a traveling Bifrost, and that's something that I've been dreaming about since I read those Walt Simonson comics as a kid. So it worked for me.
Say, right, the criticisms too, before this have been the tarmac scene in Civil War. It's been there's no color, now they're doing all the color. The problem is that we have COVID. The problem is that we have, all these restrictions, and it costs so much more money to add all of that flavor. So yeah, you're going to have a few rough edges, but yeah, I agree with you completely, Brian. I think it's it's serving the story. It's not bad effects in a movie like this don't exactly match the mood. Although that goes into another thing where, I've seen some people come out and say, well, yeah, there's too many jokes. It's this is supposed to be an emotional moment. And then immediately you're just trying to be emotional. And I also can't really get behind that because that's pretty common too, isn't it? I feel most comedies, most, things we watch in general tend to be sort of, you joke in this scene and then you have emotion. And isn't that what we get basically from Pixar movies? And that's what we get from a lot of different things. Oh, and the other, I forgot I was going to mention too, in terms of not being sure with the VFX, and I don't know, Will, if you agree with this, but the whole idea where if you have a really concentrated vision, you know exactly what you want to do, you can get something like Everything Everywhere All at Once, right? Where you can have this really considered movie on a low budget, or you can have a movie like RRR, which similar to this one, it doesn't have the best effects in the world. But it doesn't matter because the scenes, the shots themselves are so inspired and so fun to watch that you can forgive a ton. So it is kind of interesting, not to compare those two movies to Thor: Love and Thunder because I think they're better. But yeah, that's kind of where I landed. Will, did you have anything you wanted to add about the story itself? I guess you didn't really have a chance to get into the Jane stuff, the villain. What are your broad strokes?
Oh boy. So I will say my expectations for this film, because I guess my timeline is a bit different than yours, were pretty low because I have heard almost unanimously bad things about the film going into it. It just seems like a lot of people I know in my timeline were not about this film much at all. They're really criticizing a lot of things we discussed, a few things we haven't discussed yet. But I generally still like Taika Waititi. I am definitely of the opinion that I'm getting a little sick of him. John and I were having a conversation before. I don't know if it's more of a Lin-Manuel Miranda sort of thing or a sort of Seth MacFarlane sort of deal where it's I don't know if he's just getting overexposed or if it's just a little bit of he what he's doing now isn't really what appealed to me earlier in his career. Certainly I love the movie What We Do in the Shadows. I think that's probably his best film to date. I really like Boy. His second film, Hunt for the Wilder People, is really solid. I haven't watched any of the TV shows he's been involved in outside of Flight of the Conchords, but I love that show.
I do think you should watch Our Flag Means Death. It's very good.
Okay, maybe someday. There's just so much TV. I do want to watch the What We Do in the Shadows show. I've heard that's very good.
Yeah, I'm going to get to that as well eventually. Yeah.
And I do think, generally speaking, I prefer Taika Waititi's work when he's with Jermaine Clement. Jermaine Clements, jeez. I just think they kind of bring out the best in each other, and I tend to prefer when they're collaborating as opposed to when Taika is kind of doing his own thing outside of, like I said, Hunt for the Wilder People and Boy. But I will say, with this movie, I still generally am charmed by Taika Waititi's style. I think it's something that, like, I think he is talented. I think he has gotten to this position, not just out of sheer luck. He has, really earned his way into this. But I just do think that of late, his work hasn't really been as endearing to me as it has been of late. And I think with this film, it just feels very apparent to me that he's trying to juggle a number of different moods and styles and tones, similar to what he did with Thor Ragnarok. Like, they have some kind of serious moments, and they have a lot of lighthearted, goofy moments, and a lot of action beats, and a lot of dramatic moments, and a defined character arc for Thor. But with this film, it just doesn't feel like he really balances the tone as well, at least in my opinion. There's just these wild scenes that'll just go from something sort of kind of flippant and silly, like the screaming goats, to Jane's stage 4 cancer diagnosis, where her and a previous character from another film are kind of like trying the joke about her dying of cancer. And for me, it just feels
that's the message
so
of the movie,
bizarre,
though, isn't it? Isn't the whole idea of, like, we try to, like, laugh and overcome our trauma using humor, and
Sure.
sometimes it's healthy, sometimes it's not.
That's at the core of Taika Waititi's style. I'm not trying to dismiss that. I'm just saying that I still don't think it really works in this film, and that might be subjective. That's that's maybe for everyone to decide for themselves. But I just don't think it's not like a matter of, like, dark comedy not working or anything. If anything, my sense of humor is extremely dark. But I just think it just it's not easy to do these type of things. Like, you kind of have to do the work to make a scene like that really work. And I feel like they just kind of hastily put that one together. It just doesn't feel like it really fits the style and move the tone of the film. And we also have, as we mentioned, Gore the God Butcher, who at times feels like he's in a totally different film because he's completely humorless. But I will say that Christian Bale's performance is easily my favorite thing about this film. I think the cold open with Gore the God Butcher,
that's good.
That was the highlight of the film. And when I saw that, I was like, man, even though people aren't really digging this movie, maybe I'm going to be the sole guy coming out of this being like, this is one of the better MCU movies. But then after that, it didn't really connect for me. But I think he is fully committed to this, and he makes it work almost in spite of itself at times. And I think all of his scenes, his performance, I just thought was pretty outstanding. And even though it doesn't really gel with the rest of the film, I thought that kind of worked to the film's benefit at times, to really feel menacing and threatening, even when everything else can seem kind of, like I said, flippant and even a little glib at times. And I give a lot of credit to him and his performance for that. And I think that does kind of ground the film in some key ways, but I don't think that's enough to really establish a clear sense of, like, a clear tone, stakes, or emotionality, at least in my opinion.
We'll have to agree to disagree. I think, as a complete product, I think it basically works. And I think one of the things I give credit to this movie a lot is that it's a bit more standalone. It's a bit more, like, uninterested in all the other Marvel movies. It seems more interested in the Thor movies, which I really liked. I was like, it pays attention to things like if you rewatched the Thor movies that you would pick up on, and it's not trying to bring up all these other things. It's not obsessed with Loki for once, which I know some people is not, that's not a feature, but for me, it kind of was. I was like, great, let's not obsess, like, just talk about Loki the whole time or shoehorn Tom Hiddleston in. Let's just tell a new story. And there was stuff like that I appreciated. And, like, they avoided some of, like, the really bad jokes. Like, they could have easily, when I saw the sword, I was like, oh my gosh, that's related to Venom. If they try to do a Venom thing here, I'm going to get really annoyed. Like, they don't do that. They don't go for the low hanging fruit, which I really appreciated. Is there anything else to add, though? Brian, you like this movie, I think, the most. I like this movie. I had a blast in the theater. I mean, seeing it twice, though, was there anything that you feel like we're missing, we haven't really gotten into yet?
The thing that really jumped out at me on the second viewing was the thematic connections between the magic of the weapons, the Necro Sword and Mjolnir, and the magic between or the desires of people to protect those around them in the face of absent gods, and how even the gods in this universe have the same desires as the mortals, if that makes sense.
Hammers don't kill people, gods do.
Yeah. So there was a lot of thematic work there that I really admired that pops on the second viewing. I'm not sure, like, I guess tonally, the movie felt very consistent to me. It felt very consistent to Taika Waititi's style. I don't know. So I guess I just don't understand the complaint that it wasn't tonally consistent. Like, it was consistently funny. It was consistently emotional when it needed to be. And it was very much a roller coaster, which if it was all one thing, it would have felt monotonous.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I was going to say too, I don't even think it's like that. It's not that funny for me. Like, I don't find it as funny as Ragnarok, but that central gag with, Mjolnir versus Stormbreaker, the sort of like the X's and the timing of that, I actually thought that was probably funnier than anything that happened in Ragnarok for me. Like, I found that really hilarious, and I don't know if I'm just an easy mark for inanimate objects, having personalities. I probably am, but no, like, I think there's stuff in here that's really, really good. It's just that there were other things. Like, I know people are split on this. Like, people who really don't like this movie really like the goats, and some people will just hate the goats, hate the movie, whatever. I didn't like the goats at all because I just found the whole. I can't do it.
They were my favorite, like, in the comics. Like, since I was like, I don't know. I feel like I might be a little older than you two, and so like my high school experiences trying to see comic book movies were like Spawn and Batman and Robin. So it was just like I
saw those in the theater, but I was definitely kind of young.
It was bad news for everybody, and reading those Thor comic books and seeing Thor take off in his chariot with Tooth Gnasher and Tooth Grinder, thinking to myself, and Thor was always my favorite comic, those Walt Simonson, particularly the Walt Simonson run, were so amazing, and thinking to myself, it would be great one day to get this in a movie, and we're never going to, and then actually see it. It was just so overwhelming to me, and I will admit that I'm bringing my baggage to that, but it was just so delightful to see and have them, I don't know, making them screaming goats was just chef's kiss.
All right. I think we're due for like a geothermal shift or whatever the term is, something along those lines. We're a total like a changing of the guard in terms of superhero comic book movies, because I think we've sort of swung back to the earnest, sort of like sincere, but also like irreverent kind of humor that we got from like the early 2000s and a bunch of those films. And, which I've loved to see. Like, I think that like the original Spider-Man movies and everything, Will and I have been chatting about, the Spider-Man, episodes that like Blank Checks podcast has been talking about. And it's kind of interesting how then you get like right after Spider-Man 3, you get Dark Knight, you get Iron Man, and you just get like a total like shift. You get like, we suddenly start getting MCU movies. We suddenly start getting the Chris Nolan Batman movies, or I guess we had already had Batman Begins, but you get it. But like the idea to me is that I just do not want us to go back to like everything has to be self-serious. Everything has to be, Joker, where we're trying to be king. We're trying to like be king of comedy. We're trying to win awards and stuff. I don't want to go back to that. I like this zone, even if it can be improved. Like I like the idea of screaming goats. I just didn't like the screams, if that makes sense. But I don't know. Will, do you agree with that?
I mean, if it's a matter of whether we get Joker or Thor: Love and Thunder, I guess I prefer Joker of the two, but I mean, that's not really, I think tonally I agree with what you're saying, that like, I think I prefer if they could sort of balance something that was a little bit kind of campier and goofier with, something that feels like it's earnest and heartfelt. And I felt like Taika Waititi is a filmmaker who has been able to do that in other films, but unfortunately I just didn't really get that here. I think there are touches of that, certainly like the scene where they are with Zeus, and you see like all these like weird little gods from other realms and dimensions, and you see like that little guy that's just like a little hairy gnome person
more.
with just feet.
Yeah.
And you see like little like kind of like, because I think Terry Gilliam is a big influence on Taika Waititi, and like that little stuff like that. It's like, okay, I want stuff like this. Like, this is fun. But I feel like those moments were really fleeting here, and I wanted more of that and less of the kind of like barrage of CG sort of randomness that I just didn't feel very connected to emotionally. I just felt fairly numb watching a lot of this because I just wasn't really personally connected to a lot of the story. I wasn't like mad or anything. I wasn't even that bored per se. I just didn't really feel much of a connection to anything because it just felt like a lot of the people involved didn't really feel super invested in this product. And I don't know that, like, you know, for a fact, I don't know like how emotionally invested they were in this, but there is something compared to even Thor Ragnarok that just doesn't feel as cohesive and as emotionally invested, at least from my perspective.
I honestly wonder if part of that vibe you're picking up on is COVID production.
That's been our like leading theory.
It's possible, sure. I just don't know. I mean, but I feel like a movie like Doctor Strange is able to incorporate a lot more style and have more of the sincere sort of wackiness from Sam Raimi, and it has problems. I'm not going to say that movie's perfect or anything.
That's what I was about to say. I was like, I feel like it's the same kind of problems I'm having with both of these movies, even though I like both of them. I'm not like hating on them.
I don't know. I think I just found myself, I guess, more engaged with Doctor Strange ultimately in a way that I felt more disconnected to Thor Love and Thunder. But I think there is a similar issue happening. It could be COVID. I think that was an issue I had with No Way Home that other people didn't have. I just felt like there was a lot of disconnect there, especially when it came to the cameos. I felt like they were filming them in like different times. It didn't feel like a lot of the actors were in the same place at the same time recording those scenes together. But I don't know. I mean, that could just be COVID. It could just be the way Marvel is shooting these things because different actors have different schedules and they need to kind of just figure that out to meet a production deadline. I don't exactly know. It just could just be that these things are too big now and they're hard to, you know, properly manage in a thorough and kind of condensed way. And maybe that just be, yeah, sorry, good.
Well, I was going to say, could your attachment more to Doctor Strange have to do with the fact that we got 6 hours of WandaVision beforehand to help build up all of that emotional
he didn't watch WandaVision.
Yeah, I didn't watch WandaVision.
You didn't watch WandaVision.
No, I didn't watch any of the Marvel shows.
Maybe that's part of it. You would have been sick of Multiverse of Madness.
Maybe, I don't know. Maybe I have heard people say that they liked Doctor Strange less because of WandaVision. I don't know if that's true or not, but I mean, I felt like not seeing WandaVision did not impede on my appreciation of Multiverse of Madness.
I just don't get how you weren't confused about like the kids stuff and everything like that. But
I gotta explain it before.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's all in the comics. It's stuff. I don't know. That was as soon as they introduced Wanda, I was just like, oh, I wonder if they're going to go into that House of M direction and give her the kids and everything. And
she even referenced it in that interview, right? I've seen that clip going around where like 2015, she was just like, oh yeah, what if we did House of M and we did this and that? And it's just like, yep, they did it. But okay. And to your earlier point too, Will, it's a tight movie. Love and Thunder compared to Ragnarok. It's shorter. It's like 10 minutes shorter, and it doesn't kind of like drag out a lot of the scenes that you're saying. And it's hard to say if that's for the best or for the worst, but this is also one of the most expensive Marvel movies ever made. Reported budget is $250 million, but it's doing super well at the box office so far. Now, it didn't have as big of an opening weekend as Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, which I actually found surprising. I forgot that more so that Doctor Strange made as much as it did. But this one made 143 million domestic opening weekend, already almost half of what Thor Ragnarok made domestically when it came out November of 2017. So clearly, like, Thor Ragnarok and the subsequent Avengers films definitely helped build Thor into more of like a blockbuster, like opening weekend titan for these movies. And I think that that's paying off here. We'll see though what audiences think. Is this going to have legs, you know? But I think that's a good transition then to get into the Rotten Tomatoes game. We'll do that real quick, and then we'll end with a spoiler. We'll end with Brian talking about maybe a spoiler or two. But okay, so Rotten Tomatoes game. Rules are simple. You got to guess the Rotten Tomatoes score as of the day we're recording this. I'm literally refreshing the page I've had open for a while because it could change any second. But okay, we have 327 reviews counted so far. One of them is mine, and I don't think it has any impact. It's 327 at this point, so lots of people have weighed in. But we will start with Brian. Brian, what do you think the Rotten Tomatoes score is for Thor Love and Thunder? Wild guess.
83%.
83 is Brian's guess. Will, you said you might have been spoiled on this, so that's why I wanted to start with Brian. But it's been changing a lot, so...
I'm glad. I was going to say, if you didn't start with Brian, I would have said start with Brian, because I'm pretty sure I've heard what it is by now, unless it changed wildly in the next hour or so. Last I heard, it was at 68%.
Okay, well, it's not at 68% anymore.
Okay.
It's also not 83%. Now, I guess I'll just give it away because I don't know how to like do another guess there. I mean, Will, you are the closest. But, I mean, big surprise,
Okay.
you saw it. Do you think it's higher or lower at this point?
I think it's lower.
It is lower. It's 67%. I think the highest I saw it was 70, and then it went down to 69. Everybody said nice, and that was fun for everybody. And then it went down to 68. It's just been like dropping ever since. I don't know if it's going to drop that much more. But yeah, 67. This is one of the lowest.
I guess, I don't know. Rotten Tomatoes has always been rough for me because I've never seen a value in that number, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, we don't do this because we think Rotten Tomatoes holds any sway. We just think it's fun.
Okay.
And I enjoy just kind of seeing what our friends are saying. I
mean,
always kind of like Val Complex gave it a positive review. I didn't even know she had reviewed it.
I mean, we never did like Metacritic. Do you want to guess? I have that pulled up. If you and Brian want to guess that,
I'm gonna say that's 48.
Oh, okay. Brian, do you have a guess?
65.
Okay. I guess technically Brian's closer. It's at 57 right now.
Ooh, we split the difference. Yeah, you're closer. All right.
I guess those numbers are always they work better for me. I like there are so many movies I love that are in the 50% range, and it's not because like the movie was 50% bad and it was just awful. It was just like critics argued about it. You know, whether that's I don't know, Darren Aronofsky seems to do that a lot.
Oh yeah, we're gonna get to cinema score in a second, but well, what about audience score? Because we have 5,000 plus verified ratings. We didn't talk about it much, but this film does have LGBT representation. It like makes canon a few characters being LGBT, even though they were before. I think, or at least like the Tessa Thompson character, we knew, but it wasn't like as explicit as it is in this movie.
Right.
So I was wondering if there was going to be any sort of like, you know, weird fake backlash to it, people trying to argue and be annoying. But so that maybe that impacts the audience score. I'm not going to give that away, but what do you think? We'll start with you this time, Will. What do you think the audience score is?
I'm going to guess audiences are generally pretty high on these films. So I'm going to say 85%.
Brian, what's your guess?
After all the stuff that's gone on with Star Wars and even most recently with Kenobi, I just have no faith in those audience scores. So I'm going to say like 65.
It's actually, Will, you were pretty close, is 81. They're a little higher on it. I was expecting like 65 or like around there because I figured people would try to like spam these things and you can't trust it. But
I should have switched my guesses.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think it's better to be on the pulse of audiences, probably. Okay. And then cinema score. Now, the folks in Vegas, they saw this movie. Will, what do you think the cinema score is for this one? I'll give you a hint. It's speaking of Darren Aronofsky, it's not the same as Mother. It's not an F.
Okay, I was going to say A-.
Okay, and Brian, what do you think the cinema score is?
That would be my guess too.
You're both just so close. It's a B+. I think it's a little bit lower. I'm surprised. Yeah, I thought this is such a bit of a crowd pleaser, but yeah, I guess some people, you know, they had slot machines to get to it.
That's pretty damning, actually, because I think a lot of the Marvel movies get A or A-.
Yeah, vast majority of them, I want to say.
Yeah, so that's not great.
Last one we'll do before we wrap it up. Letterboxd average. 160,000 logs on Letterboxd. That's the highest we've seen on an opening weekend in quite a while, I want to say. I think the last one was big. I think we saw something that was like over 200,000, but we have an average rating here from 0 to 5. Will, what do you think?
Tricky. My heart says 3.2.
Okay, let's see if your heart's right. Brian, what do you think?
3.8.
Will, you were only off by 1. 3.3.
Okay.
Letterboxd is being kind of harsh. I don't know. I would have expected maybe not 3.8, but like, I don't know, closer to that. But you know, I'm also seeing some people on here that I wouldn't expect positive ratings from. So
yeah,
that.
I don't know. I mean, I can only speak for myself, but it just seems like my timeline is not really digging this. I have seen some people really go to bat for it. Like my letterbox seems pretty split, but I am definitely seeing some negative responses, even from people who tend to like Marvel movies. They're just like, this one didn't really do it for me.
I mostly see 3s, you know, like, and I see like Charlie gave it 3, Kimber Myers gave it 3, friends of the show. I'm seeing, you know, Allie, she gave it 2.5, which is about what I expected. And yeah, you know, Matt Donato gave it 4, you know, so every once in a while you get, and look there's Brian Young at 4.5. So I think some people are being kinder to it, or are going to be kinder to it as time goes on. That's my guess. I feel like it's going to be like Jojo Rabbit, though, where people are going to like dig in their heels for the heck of it.
I think there's going to be a lot of discourse once people start sort of pulling that spoiler barrier down, talking about the ultimate revelation of the title, but also the intertwining nature and the similarities structurally between Gore and Jane and Gore and Thor. And I think there's a lot more to dig into. And as people watch it more and analyze it more, they're going to find more they really like about it.
Yeah, I think that's that's my guess as well. But let's finish this out. Brian, you had something you want to bring up, but we had to wait. If we're going to do a little bit of a spoiler thing here. So if you haven't seen the movie at all, and you don't want to know anything, then you can just go ahead and we'll see you next time. But Brian Young, what is this spoiler thing that you wanted to bring up?
It just left it left a little bit of a bad taste in my mouth, where I felt like I feel like they could have handled the end of Jane as the Mighty Thor a little differently, and maybe not, written her out completely.
Do you think though that they're going to bring her back with the Valhalla stuff?
No, I think that Valhalla stuff was actually a closed door, unless they end up. I mean, like, actually, this is something that could happen. But in Secret Invasion, one of the coolest things in Secret Invasion was basically Hercules gets in a boat and he's just like, come on, we're going to go kill the Skrull gods. And they fly off to the heavens of the Skrulls gods to go try to fight them, because it's like, we're going to fight the Skrulls every way we can. And Valhalla could figure into that if they do in a Secret Invasion. Maybe the Skrull gods come and start killing Valhalla. I don't know. But
see, I had a different... maybe the opposite of that, where I thought, like, what if they try to do a thing where like they try to have another Portals moment where all of a sudden you have all the Valhalla gods come in briefly, like a Wild Hunt sort of thing. So like their spirits come in, so you get to see Mighty Thor, you get to see Loki, like canon Loki, and you get to see Heimdall just kind of come in, Odin. They could do something like that, right? I don't know if that matches any comic storylines, but I think it'd be cool.
I mean, they could definitely. I mean, I was kind of surprised that in Ragnarok they didn't just recast everybody, to be honest, because that's sort of the way the mythology goes, and the way Walt Simonson's mythology was really built when they did the Surtur Saga and Ragnarok, but I mean, they haven't really introduced Balder the Brave either, so maybe if we get a Balder the Brave story.
Yeah. And we haven't done Wrecking Crew.
Yeah.
There's so much left.
Yeah, like if we get some Balder the Brave and they actually kill him and actually invoke a real Ragnarok where everyone actually does sort of reincarnate in a different form, and we can get Odin back and with a different actor, and we can get Thor back with a different actor.
Yeah, let's get like a young Odin, right? Like we don't have to recast Anthony, we could recast Anthony Hopkins.
That actually leads into a question I was going to ask, especially when I hear Brian's opinion on this, is that, like, how long do you think they're going to keep Thor going? At least the Chris Hemsworth version of Thor, because he's like the last of the main Avenger actors to really stick with it, with the exception, I was getting there, with the exception of Mark Ruffalo, who's been more of a supporting player throughout most of these. Like, I mean, even when they had a Hulk movie, it was Edward Norton. So, I mean, for him, he's the only real actor who can kind of like do like, hey, I'll do like a Marvel movie here and there, and then I'll just kind of do like these, prestige dramas or different projects. So it seems to really work out for him. But, Chris Hemsworth's usually always like one of the leads or the lead of these films. And he's been doing this longer than any of the main Avenger actors. So do you think he's going to be just kind of doing like, is this going to be like a new trilogy, like 5 and 6? Or do you think he's going to do like one more and wrap it up? I was kind of think this would be the last one for him, but the ending suggests otherwise.
I don't know. Like, I think that's a really good question. Like, how long can he maintain that physique? Right? Like, just off the top.
Yeah, right.
It can't be healthy for him at this point.
No, probably not. But like, I want to say I saw an interview with him where he thought he wasn't even coming back for this one, and that it was just like the story really drew him and he wanted to come back for it. And I think all of them, to be honest, if there was the right story for them to figure out how or why to come back, they probably would, with maybe the exception of Chris Evans, who just kind of seems over it.
Mm-hmm. He tweeted earlier, right? He was like, no, Sam Wilson is Captain America, leave me alone.
You think it's more unlikely that Chris Evans would come back over Robert Downey Jr., though? Of like the main...
I think the thing is that at least with Chris Evans, there's a whole timeline of stories that we could probably get with him, or some way for him to come back. Right. With Tony, it's pretty clear what happened. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
And
I mean, it's not possible though with the multiverse, but I just feel like it would be more likely with Chris Evans than with Robert Downey Jr. at this point, who seems just totally done with the MCU. But I mean, theoretically, you could bring any of these people back with
with a large enough dump truck of money.
Right.
Any of
Oh,
them
true
could.
that. Yeah, as well.
That's the thing. And I think like this is the last thing I want to mention about all the Marvel stuff, and we can end it here, I guess. But I think if Marvel's going to have like the staying power it used to with a lot of people, not just, you know, a very devoted fan base, they got to start creating gaps. They got to start making us yearn, you know, and miss these characters, because that is the thing with Thor. We're going to get sick of it. And maybe he's got like one in the tank left. The guy's 38, Chris Hemsworth, that is. But I think that like they've been smart to kind of add a little bit of time in between these things. I think we need a little bit of a break. And, you know, we're still getting, you know, new characters, new shows. They can still keep doing that stuff. But even in general, I think like there's so much Marvel stuff that happens this year. It feels less special, a movie like this, or like a Marvel thing happening now, because it just feels like we're always getting something in the Marvel universe. The barrier to entry is becoming like it was with the comics, where you can't just sort of like pick this stuff up. You got to devote like a chunk of your life to trying to catch up on everything if you're a completionist, and it's unclear what you have to complete versus what you don't have to. So I think that's kind of going to be the big pain point for Marvel. They're already years ahead of me on this. Like they were talking about this years and years ago. So it's not like they aren't aware, but I do think that's going to be a challenge moving forward.
Yeah, and then I do kind of wonder about that too, because like didn't Kevin Feige recently have like some sort of like conference or meeting where he's planning out the next like 10 years of the MCU or something like that? Like they're still planning ahead, but I do kind of wonder about that as well. Like, is the public really that interested in like 10 more years of connected stuff like this, or do they want something that's a little bit more varied, maybe a little bit more filmmaker driven? I don't really know. I'm kind of wondering what is the step forward for Marvel going into phase 5, but I guess we'll have to see with time.
Yeah.
Well, all right. On that note, then, we will see you all for phase, 281, I guess. That's how many episodes of this show we've done.
Is that how many we've done?
We're at 281.
We're almost at 300.
What? Yeah,
we're almost at 300.
I thought you said when was 300. I was like, well,
no. I mean, we're getting there, though. It's going to come up this year. Yeah.
I mean, technically, with all the bonuses and everything else we've done, we've released well over 500, things.
Oh, wow.
But
what a time to be alive.
Yeah. We're in our 5th year. We're going to hit 6 years in a matter of a half a year. So, what are you going to...
Oh, man. We're going to get replaced soon with the younger Cinemaholics.
That's right. We're going to get recast.
Over Cinemaholics reboot.
Yeah, I'm closer to 38 than I was yesterday. That's for sure. Okay.
Oh, boy.
We'll see you all next time. Brian, thank you so much for coming on the show, talking in all things Marvel with us. It was a true pleasure for us, and I hope it was for you too.
Oh, it absolutely was. Thanks for having me on, and maybe I'll be back sometime.
We'll have to invite you back. And of course, listeners, we're linking to Brian's Twitter and everything else in the show notes. So definitely find Brian and all of their work if you haven't already.